Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 151, Building Toilets and Extracting Saltpeter. As one of the earliest old ministers who followed Marin, Heidel was still a college student in the Middle Ages. He was both excited and took it for granted that he was appointed as the Prime Minister of the Earldom of Oldenburg. Because Marin had already trained him as a reserve Prime Minister. However, Geoffrey was still there and did a good job, so Marin had no reason to replace Geoffrey with Heidel. It just so happened that Marin controlled the Earldom of Oldenburg and simply sent Heidel to be Prime Minister. But before leaving for the Earldom of Oldenburg to take office, Heidel found Marin and asked Marin to allocate a group of fertilizer processing plant personnel to go to the Earldom of Oldenburg with him and set up several fertilizer processing plants there. As an old minister who followed Marin during the Texel Island period, Heidel certainly knew the secret of the high grain yield in the Earldom of East Frisia. It's nothing more than processing feces into fertilizer, and then the grain will be harvested. However, knowing it is knowing, Heidel and the first batch of old ministers who followed Marin did not know how to process fertilizer specifically. Marin was also smart. He dried the feces in the sun and air for several months, making the feces almost smellless. Moreover, the processed fertilizer blocks do not burn the seedlings. If the feces are applied directly to the fields, it is easy to burn the seedlings. In fact, Hayter and other old officials have actually tried to apply feces directly as fertilizer to the fields in private. But the result is that the seedlings were burned and yellow. Even if some experiments are successful, the effect is far inferior to the compound fertilizer produced by the fertilizer processing plant controlled by Marin himself. After all, the fertilizer produced by the fertilizer processing plant contains not only feces, but also potassium salt and apatite. Of course, in the early days when the apatite mine of Laon was not obtained, Marin added the fish bones left by the fishermen after killing fish or the fish meal made from the dried and ground fish that were not delicious. However, collecting fish bones and fish meal is too laborious. After obtaining Laon, Marin directly added apatite. However, because of the good confidentiality, Kohler was the only one among Marin's subordinates who knew that the fertilizer contained potassium salt and apatite. Because he sent people to mine and transport the potassium salt mines in the Harz Mountains and the apatite mines in Laon. As for others, even Schwartz, he couldn't figure out the real secret of the fertilizer. In fact, it was precisely because of this that Frundsberg, who had actually worked for the emperor, had never given up Marin and directly thrown himself into the emperor's arms. Because his fiefdom in Leer County also needed fertilizer supplied by Marin's fertilizer factory. Frundsberg originally planned to completely switch to the emperor's side, but in the manner given to him by the emperor, he found that the seedlings were burned after he tried to use manure directly. Moreover, even if some fields did not burn the seedlings, the yield per moo was only about 200 pounds, which was more than half of the yield per moo of the manor in the East Frisian county. Therefore, he did not think about completely leaving Marin. As a reward, Marin would send people to deliver a batch of compound fertilizer in sacks every year for Frundsberg's estate in the Duchy of Tyrol in western Austria. Now that Heidel is serving as the Prime Minister of the palace in the county of Oldenburg, he naturally hopes to achieve results. Moreover, if compound fertilizers are not used in the farmland of the county of Oldenburg, the per acre yield will definitely be as low as before. For this reason, before taking office, he specifically asked Marin to send experienced serf craftsmen to collect the feces of the county of Oldenburg and make fertilizer using a secret method. In this way, the farmland of the county of Oldenburg will have a good harvest, and he, as the Prime Minister, will have more money and grain to use, and his political achievements will be better. Hearing Hayter's request, Marin was also surprised. He almost forgot that the Oldenburg county, the Schleswig Duchy, including the Jever region, had not yet established a fertilizer processing plant. So, he quickly selected 1,000 people from the 3,000 serfs responsible for making fertilizers in the 6 major fertilizer processing plants under his personal control, and sent them to the Oldenburg county, the Jever region and the Schleswig Duchy to build 20 fertilizer processing plants directly under his leadership. Although each fertilizer processing plant has only 50 people, it is a little less, but fertilizer processing technology is not difficult. These 50 veterans can take apprentices and take hundreds of honest local serfs as apprentices to form new fertilizer processing plants. In fact, it is just right to build a new fertilizer processing plant now. Because it takes several months to collect the feces, dry them in the sun, and air dry them before most of the feces odor in the fertilizer blocks can be dissipated. It just so happens that the crops in the county of Oldenburg, the Jever region and the Duchy of Schleswig cannot be caught up this year. Because it will be harvested in the autumn soon. However, a few months later, when the first batch of fertilizers is produced, it will be just in time for the spring plowing in March and April next year, which will not delay the work at all. After the compound fertilizer mixed with potassium salt and apatite is used in the spring of next year, the county of Oldenburg and the duchy of Schleswig will also be full of grain in the autumn of next year. At that time, the newly added land will be able to attract more immigrants. However, Marin will certainly not issue an order to build 20 new fertilizer plants, saying that I want to build a fertilizer processing plant. In that case, other countries will easily discover this secret and may jointly force Marin to hand over the secret of fertilizer. In public, Marin will use personal and environmental hygiene as an excuse to issue a decree to force residents to prohibit urinating and defecating anywhere. If necessary, you must go to the toilet. For this reason, Marin stipulates that there must be at least one public toilet on every street in all cities of the three principalities. A large public toilet will also be built in every community in the city. At the same time, Eastern-style toilets are promoted in the city, requiring people to go to the public toilets during the day and use the toilets at night. The next morning, the feces in the toilets are concentrated into the cesspools of the public toilets. Moreover, every morning when the city gates are opened, the people in the fertilizer processing plant will arrange ox carts to come and use large wooden barrels to pull the feces in the public toilets out of the city and send them to the manure pools of the fertilizer factory. The manure pools are used to collect nitrate soil. After these feces are sent to multiple manure pools, 1 month later, the soil beside the manure pools will be used to extract soil nitrate. And those feces, after the nitrate soil is cultivated, will be shoveled away again and put into another pool to mix with potassium salt and apatite sent by Kohler's men. After mixing, they will be dried immediately and exposed to the sun to become hard feces blocks. Then, these compound fertilizer blocks will be sent to the rain shelter for air drying to dissipate the stench of feces. A few months later, these fertilizer blocks no longer had any odor and became a mysterious fertilizer that no one recognized. With the current level of technology, the discipline of chemistry has not yet developed. Even if this fertilizer is stolen, others cannot figure out what it is. And outside the fertilizer factory, there are soldiers loyal to Marin guarding it, and they will build tall city walls to protect the secrets of the fertilizer field. If the fertilizer field is besieged by the enemy, in the absence of hope, these soldiers will directly kill all the serfs who make compound fertilizers in the fertilizer field to keep the secret. And those soldiers stationed in the fertilizer field are not allowed to inquire about the secrets of fertilizer processing. In this way, even if the fertilizer field is captured, no secrets will be obtained. In addition to ordering the construction of a large number of public toilets in the city, Marin also ordered the construction of public toilets in the downwind of those country estates to collect feces. Of course, the reason was still for personal and environmental hygiene. When Marin ordered the construction of public toilets in the county of Oldenburg and the duchy of Schleswig and promoted the use of toilets, all those who didn't know about it were confused. Marin, you like cleanliness yourself, but you don't allow people to urinate and defecate anywhere. Isn't that too much? However, Marin made a tough rule: any adult found urinating and defecating anywhere would be fined 1 penny. At this time, the average person's daily wage was only 2 pfennigs. A fine of 1 pfennig was equivalent to half a day's wages for a person. No one was willing to pay such a high fine. So, many people had no choice but to give in. In fact, if it weren't for the fear of arousing opposition from the church, Marin would have planned to build public baths in every region. Along the way, Marin discovered that people in the duchy of Schleswig and the county of Oldenburg also didn't like to take a bath. However, not taking a bath was advocated by the people of the church, and Marin didn't dare to advocate bathing publicly. Otherwise, it would be regarded as heresy. Only when his father-in-law became the pope would he dare to promote public baths in his own country. As for now, Marin and Angela set an example and took a bath frequently. Doing so will at least make his courtiers and men imitate each other. Over the years, people in the county of East Frisia have become accustomed to taking hot baths frequently. Especially those nobles and soldiers. If they don't take a bath and smell bad, Marin will directly express his disgust for them. In such an environment, those nobles, officials, and soldiers in the army gradually developed a good habit of taking a bath. As for the newly controlled Duchy of Schleswig and the Earldom of Oldenburg, there is no hurry, so let's take it slowly. However, the large-scale construction of toilets will not touch the sensitive nerves of the church, but it can be done with great fanfare. In this way, it is also convenient to collect and process feces. Among them, after the feces are collected, the first round is used to extract saltpeter, which is also a decision made by Marin after careful consideration. The last siege of Copenhagen, Marin did not order hundreds of artillery to bombard the city walls together, but he was reluctant to consume gunpowder. Because Marin's current gunpowder is mainly made of saltpeter purchased from India. It takes nearly 2 years for the fleet to go back and forth to India, which is too inconvenient. Therefore, Marin ordered to add a process for extracting saltpeter in the fertilizer processing plant. In this way, he can also obtain a lot of saltpeter every year for the configuration of gunpowder. Only with enough gunpowder can Marin's army use line shooting and artillery bombing with confidence. Otherwise, the consumption of gunpowder alone will make Marin's advanced tactics unfeasible. In addition, Marin will also set up a large number of saltpeter collection officers in the Duchy of Schleswig and the County of Oldenburg, responsible for collecting saltpeter near the toilets of the people and the stables and cowsheds to increase the source of gunpowder. Chapter 152 Pyrethrum and Local Pesticides. It was midsummer, and mosquitoes in Europe were also very active. Marin was not afraid, because he had thick skin. However, little Caesar was afraid, and he was bitten by mosquitoes for a lot of times, which made Angela cry. Marin naturally remembered his previous plan to grow wormwood in tropical areas and use wormwood to smoke mosquitoes, so he sent people to that wormwood field, collected a lot of wormwood leaves, dried them, and burned them in the master bedroom to repel mosquitoes. Although the smell was unpleasant, it finally allowed the pink little Caesar to avoid the invasion of mosquitoes. To be honest, there are not many mosquitoes in Europe. This is mainly because European agriculture is mainly dry land. And mosquitoes like to hide in paddy fields the most. Therefore, places where rice is grown often have more mosquitoes than places where rice is not grown. In later generations, Marin was not very willing to return to his hometown in summer. Because the mosquitoes in his hometown are really too big. Perhaps, those mosquitoes developed well in the rice fields with sufficient fertilizers. Each of them is the Yao Ming of the mosquito world, stinging people painfully. Europe only has dry land and no paddy fields, so there are naturally fewer mosquitoes. However, the East Frisian region has many swamps, which is very suitable for the survival of mosquitoes. Therefore, there are more mosquitoes here than in other areas. But compared with the real water town, there are still fewer. Under the smoke of wormwood, these mosquitoes naturally cannot become a climate. After helping his son successfully drive away the invasion of mosquitoes, Marin hugged Angela and began to brag, saying that he had a keen eye and discovered how magical wormwood is. Unexpectedly, Angela was very disrespectful. It's just to repel mosquitoes. We have similar flowers and plants in Italy. Ah. Marin's bull couldn't be blown anymore, and he was a little exasperated. Fortunately, there were only 2 of them, otherwise he would lose face. In my hometown in Italy, there is a kind of chrysanthemum, which is also very powerful. Pick it and dry it, and put it in the house. It can not only repel mosquitoes, but also poison flies. Pyrethrum. Marin suddenly reacted. Isn't it? Pyrethrum is one of the plants with the best effect in repelling flies and mosquitoes. The most important thing is that its toxicity is only for small insects such as flies and mosquitoes, but it is not toxic to large mammals such as humans. Moreover, Marin remembered that his high school biology teacher in his previous life also said that pyrethrum is a natural plant pesticide. Dry the pyrethrum, grind it into powder, add some water, and make a suspension with some soap, so that it can be sprayed directly on the crops. This natural plant pesticide of pyrethrum can effectively prevent and control aphids, leaf cicadas, cabbage worms, golden flower worms and other pests and diseases, which is very beneficial to the growth of crops. However, the effects that Marin's biology teacher in his previous life talked about did not attract farmers. Why? The cost is high. Pyrethrum is a foreign thing originating from Europe, and it takes a large area of land to plant it. It is also very troublesome and costly to pick chrysanthemums, dry them and make powder. At least, it is much higher than the chemical pesticides produced by factories purchased from agricultural companies. Ordinary people are very careful with their money, and only ghosts would do such thankless things. So, even if pyrethrum pesticides are environmentally friendly and safe, what about it? The high cost means nothing. But Marin has now traveled to the 16th century. In this era, there were no chemical pesticides. And Marin is not a chemistry major, and does not understand the configuration of chemical pesticides. In this case, plant-based pesticides such as pyrethrum are very useful. Marin remembered that his biology teacher, who was an environmental activist in his previous life, also said that pyrethrum, tobacco and derris are the world's 3 major plant-based pesticides. Of course, derris is produced in tropical and subtropical regions in East Asia and Southeast Asia, so Marin doesn't have to think about it. Even if it is introduced, it cannot be grown locally. As for tobacco, it is still in America at this moment, and it takes manpower to find it, so there is no need to think about it. However, in the future, we can grow more tobacco, on the one hand, to make cigarettes, and on the other hand, to soak it in water as a pesticide. As for pyrethrum, this thing is native to Europe, and it can be introduced and then planted on a large scale. It seems that when wormwood is lit, it can only repel mosquitoes, while pyrethrum can kill mosquitoes and flies. After thinking about it, Marin still thinks it is safer to use wormwood to repel mosquitoes. At least, the toxin is not as strong as pyrethrum. However, pyrethrum also needs to be planted on a large scale. It is mainly used to configure pesticides and prevent pests. In fact, in the past few years, after Marin introduced potash fertilizers and phosphate fertilizers, and used salt water to select seeds, the yield per mu should theoretically reach more than 600 pounds. Unfortunately, there are large and small pests and diseases every year, which ultimately makes the yield per mu only about 400 pounds. If there are enough pesticides, the yield per mu will inevitably reach 500 or 600 pounds. By then, Marin's income will increase by half. For this reason, Marin specially took out 10,000 acres of land, intending to use it for concentrated planting of pyrethrum. In addition, 10,000 acres of land were taken out for planting wormwood. Wormwood can be used as a traditional Chinese medicine, with multiple medicinal effects. At the same time, it can also be used as a weak plant pesticide and can also be used to repel mosquitoes. As for pyrethrum, it goes without saying that it is highly toxic and is cultivated to be used as a pesticide. At that time, there will be enough plant pesticides made from pyrethrum, and wherever there are diseases and pests, they will be sprayed. After making plans, Marin found Kohler and asked him to arrange people to go to various parts of Europe to collect pyrethrum seeds for the planting of the 10,000 acres of land. According to Angela, pyrethrum is very common in Europe and can be found everywhere in many places in Italy. However, it is not very common in northern Germany. So, Marin asked Kohler to send people to Italy to collect more pyrethrum seeds for local planting. In short, we must find enough seeds to plant 10,000 acres of land. As for the planting of wormwood, Marin felt that there should not be enough seeds to plant 10,000 acres. Because, after the successful cultivation in the glass greenhouse, Marin only asked people to plant a few acres of wormwood. Even if all the seeds are collected, it will only be enough to plant hundreds of acres at most. However, this is not a big problem. As long as a few more rounds of planting are done, there will be enough seeds to plant 10,000 acres of land. Speaking of pesticides, Marin thought of the earliest pesticides, Bordeaux mixture and lime sulfur. However, Bordeaux mixture is copper sulfate. Now that copper is so expensive, Bordeaux mixture will obviously not be cheap. Therefore, even if Marin knew about Bordeaux mixture, he would not get it. Because the cost is too high. But lime sulfur can be made, and Moshan can make it. Because lime sulfur is made of quicklime and sulfur. Quicklime and sulfur are very common in Europe and are cheap. It is a good inorganic pesticide. In addition, Marin also remembered that wood ash water seemed to have a certain insecticidal effect, and it was also a very good potassium fertilizer. In addition, the biogas liquid after fermentation in the biogas digester was also a very high-quality fertilizer, and it also had a strong insecticidal effect. Moreover, the biogas liquid could also be used to soak seeds, because it had both strong fertility and a certain insecticidal effect. The seeds soaked in biogas liquid not only grew well and were easy to germinate, but were also killed once, making the seeds healthier and easier to grow after being planted. In fact, the seeds produced by seed companies in later generations were soaked in specific nutrient solutions. These nutrient solutions not only have sufficient nutrients, but can also kill the germs in the seeds. In this way, the seeds will be healthier and easier to grow after being planted. If ordinary grains are used as seeds, they may carry some germs and nutritional problems, so the growth will not be so good. The more Marin thought about it, the more excited he became. He wrote down all the knowledge he had neglected in his previous life in a small notebook. Of course, he used Chinese characters, so even if they were stolen, no one in Europe could understand them at that time. Chapter 153 By some Galleons. The Crimean Khanate fought very smoothly against the Principality of Ryazan, a vassal of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, because the Moscow army was fighting in Finland and the Principality of Ryazan had no reinforcements to help resist the attack of the Crimean army. Therefore, the city of Ryazan was breached. After the city of Ryazan was breached, the whole city was bloodily looted. Not only were the property and food robbed clean, but many residents were also killed. As long as the Crimean soldiers did not cooperate during the robbery, the Crimean soldiers' scimitars would fall. Fortunately, the city of Ryazan had been attacked by the Grand Duchy of Moscow. In order to escape, Ivan Ivanovich, the Duke of Ryazan, took his family and some of the nobles into a secret passage in the backyard of the palace, hid, and escaped. In fact, that secret passage was a special passage used by the previous Duke of Ryazan to have an affair with a Ryazan noblewoman. Unexpectedly, at the critical moment, the lives of the Duke of Ryazan and some of the great nobles of Ryazan were saved. It was really unpredictable. Those who were estranged from the Duke of Ryazan had no chance to fall into the secret passage. Then, the whole family suffered. The lucky ones were kidnapped by the Crimeans and could be redeemed with money. The unlucky ones were chopped by the Crimean Tatar soldiers when the city was broken. Ryazan city was the center of the Principality of Ryazan, and the Principality of Ryazan was a relatively rich agricultural country among the Russian countries. Therefore, the Crimean Khanate made a lot of money this time and seized a lot of food and property. Afterwards, after more than 2 months of sweeping, the Crimean Khanate seized 500,000 bags of rye, each bag was about 100 pounds, thousands of cattle and horses, and more than 200 carts of various property in the Ryazan area. This time, Munkyur Khan led his troops to the expedition. When he saw so many spoils, he couldn't stop laughing wildly. Not only that, the Crimeans also plundered 40,000 people in the Principality of Ryazan. Among them, young women accounted for half. In addition, there were 8,000 children and 12,000 men. Most of the captured men were strong but had no courage to resist. As for those who resisted, they were chopped into meat sauce by the scimitars of the Tatar cavalry. The Grand Duchy of Moscow called back the 20,000 elite troops who invaded Finland, but did not dare to rescue Ryazan. Because the Crimean Khanate came with 40,000 main cavalry this time, which can be regarded as the best. If relying on the strong city, the army of the Grand Duchy of Moscow dared to fight. But if it was in the wilderness, these 20,000 elites were not enough for the Crimean Tatar cavalry to chop. Therefore, Prince Vasily, the regent of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, could only endure it and did not dare to send troops to fight the Crimean Khanate. However, what the Mauzi of the Grand Duchy of Moscow did not expect was that the people of the steppes have always admired only those who are brave. The Crimean Khanate, which has always been domineering, will not only not appreciate the Grand Duchy of Moscow's tolerance, but will also inspire their bandit ambitions of coming again next time. However, after transporting all the property, food, livestock and captives back to the Crimean Khanate, Munkyur Khan was in a bad mood. Because, although Marin had reached a trade agreement with it, there were not enough ships to transport slaves to the port of Kaffa. As for the land route, it had been made clear in advance that only cattle and horses could be transported, not people. Because the slave trade was too shameful, the Vatican did not allow it. Therefore, the ships that traded slaves could only take the Mediterranean line. However, Marin currently does not have enough paddle boats suitable for the Mediterranean to transport people to the port of Kaffa. After all, the Mediterranean has small winds and waves and often stops wind, which makes ordinary sailboats not suitable for sailing in it, and only paddle boats can be used. However, Marin now only has 2 500-ton modified galleys for the Egyptian trade route. Egypt is also a very important trade route. It is not wise to stop this line and transport slaves to the Crimean Khanate's port of Kaffa. The 40,000 slaves captured from Ryazan consume an astonishing amount of food every day. Although the Crimeans have abused these slaves, they still have to give them a lot of food every day. 40,000 mouths, the food consumed every day makes Munkyur Khan very painful. So, Munkyur Khan anxiously sent envoys to Lithuania, claiming that if the North Sea Chamber of Commerce represented by Marin did not transport slaves again, he would turn his face, tear up the previous peace treaty, and re-ally with the Grand Duchy of Moscow. Lithuanian Grand Duke Alexander was also panicked, and immediately sent people to East Frisia to urge Marin to take over the slaves quickly. Otherwise, if the Crimean Khanate really reunited with the Russians, the Lithuanians would be in trouble. After hearing about the threat of Munkyur Khan, Marin was at a loss. He did not want the Crimean Khanate to join forces with the Russians again, otherwise, the Russians really could not suppress it. For the long-term plan, Marin decided to meet the requirements of the Crimeans and buy half of the slaves. However, it is easy to pay, but it is very difficult to transport the 20,000 slaves back to East Frisia. Because, that is 20,000 people, not 20,000 pieces of cargo. Marin now has only 2 paddle boats suitable for sailing in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Although each ship is relatively large, it is used to transport slaves. One ship can only transport 300 or 400 people at a time. For 20,000 slaves, Marin can't think of any good way. Count on the shipyard to copy a few more improved versions of the 500-ton paddle boats, but there is no time. Because the Crimeans are eager to get rid of these slaves who waste food, and they are very tight. It takes several months to build a ship, and the irritable Tatars are not willing to wait. Hiring Venetian ships for shipping is a solution to the problem. However, this method is not advisable. Because if the Venetians spread the news that Marin bought slaves from pagans, Marin's reputation would be ruined. After thinking about it, Marin finally decided to buy a ship. Marin was not short of sailors. He now had tens of thousands of Frisian fishermen under his rule, and it was easy to select sailors from them. Although the paddle boat was not very different from the cog sailboat, the operating principle was roughly similar. Only rowing was a bit difficult. After all, when there was no wind in the Mediterranean, the paddle boat relied on the sailors to row to solve the power problem. Kohler came immediately after hearing Marin's call. "Master, do you have something to do with me?" "Well, I reached an agreement with the Crimean Khanate to buy the Slavic slaves they captured. Unfortunately, I don't have enough ships to transport people to the Crimean Khanate. So, I want you to send someone to Italy to buy a paddle boat." "Understood, I'll send someone to do it right away." Marin sighed. He knew that buying a ship was easy. After all, there were many ships in Venice. It is also easy for sailors to control the sails. The Frisian fishermen under him are very good at controlling sails and fishing. However, he is short of professionals who can row. Don't underestimate rowing. Rowing is also a technical job. Those skilled boatmen can spend the least effort when rowing, so that the speed of the ship can be maximized. And those who don't know how to row, rowing is not only laborious, but also inefficient and has low endurance. "Master, why are you sighing?" Kohler was a little puzzled by Marin's sighs. "Aren't things solved? The ship is fine, and the sailors are fine. But we lack skilled rowers. After all, sailing in the Mediterranean requires a large number of rowers." Marin sighed. "That's it?" Kohler asked in surprise. "Do you know how to solve it?" Marin was also surprised. "You know, it takes at least several months to barely train a rower. Of course, I told Art that it is very popular in Italy to buy slaves to row the paddle boats. When the time comes, when you buy a boat, you can spend a little more money to buy some slaves who are specially used for rowing from the Italian slave market." "Rowing, slaves?" Marin was a little stunned. "Yes, rowing slaves. It is said that only a small number of these rowing slaves are local Italian sailors, and the rest are mostly bought by the Venetians from Eastern Europe. Many rowing slaves were simply bought by the Venetians from the Crimean Khanate at a low price. So that's it." Marin suddenly realized. So, Marin ordered Kohler to go to Italy to buy a batch of paddle boats. At the same time, buy a batch of rowing slaves who are proficient in rowing. Together with the Frisian sailors who are good at operating sailboats, Marin can organize a fleet of paddle boats in a short time, which can be used to transport a large number of slaves to the Crimean Khanate's Kaffa port. Chapter 154, Cultivation of Chinese Translation. Columbus's fleet had already set out to find Panama, but Marin understood that Panama was just a springboard to control North and South America, as well as to China and Japan. The reason for choosing the Pacific route was because of the favorable wind. To go to China from the Indian Ocean, you have to go around the east and west coasts of Africa, then pass through the Strait of Malacca, and pass through the South China Sea to reach China. The biggest problem with this road is that the wind direction is changeable and you have to pass through several wind belts. In the age of sail, ships do not take the shortest route, but look for routes that can maximize the use of wind power. If you take the African coastal route to enter the Indian Ocean, you first enter the doldrums at 30 degrees north latitude from the prevailing westerly belt north of 30 degrees north latitude, and then continue southward, and then enter the northeast trade wind belt from 30 degrees north latitude to the equator. After that, you enter the southeast trade wind belt from the equator to 30 degrees south latitude. When you reach the South African waters at the southernmost tip of Africa, you will enter the prevailing westerly wind belt. After reaching the east coast of Africa, it will change again. In short, although the total distance of this route is not longer than that of the Pacific route, or even shorter, the wind belt changes too much, sometimes with tailwind, sometimes against wind, and the sailboats are very unsmooth. Marin remembered that in the 17th century, the Dutch East India Company used advanced galleons to transport silk, porcelain, etc. purchased from Taiwan back to the country, and it also took up to 10 months of sailing. However, taking another route, that is, the Spanish Manila galleon trade route, the Pacific route, takes much less time. This is because the Spaniards made full use of the trade winds in the Pacific. For example, when setting out from the Americas to the Philippine colony in Asia, the Spanish sailing ships took the northeast trade wind belt between 30 degrees north latitude and the equator. Moreover, in the Pacific Ocean at this latitude, there is also an ocean current from east to west, the North Equatorial Current. The sailing ship takes this route, which is equivalent to tailwind and water, and the speed is very fast. Even the Spanish galleons, which were slightly inferior to the British and Dutch galleons, only took 3 months to travel from the west coast of America to the Philippines. And the voyage from Europe to Panama only took 1 or 2 months if the galleon was used. That is to say, if you take the smooth sailing route from Europe to the southeast coast of China and take the Pacific Ocean, the total time is only about 5 months, which is half the time of the Dutch. As for the return trip, it is basically the same. The Manila galleon usually departs from Manila and sails northeast along the Kuroshio. After arriving in the waters near Japan north of 30 degrees north latitude, it follows the prevailing westerly winds in this area and the North Pacific warm current heading northeast, all the way east. After arriving in California on the west coast of America, it goes south along the south-flowing California cold current to the west coast of Mexico, or simply goes to Panama. However, although this route is also with the wind, it is very roundabout, first going north and then south, and the total time for the whole voyage is 6 months, which is twice the time from east to west. This is the difference between favorable and unfavorable winds in the sailing age. It is also a bit unfavorable to return to Europe from Panama, and it is estimated to take 3 months. In this way, the total time will reach about 9 months, which is not much different from the time taken by the Dutch along the African coastal route. Of course, that is the time taken by using an ordinary galleon. If it is replaced with a clipper. A terrifying data suddenly appeared in Marin's mind. The British clipper ship, Cutty Sark, also called the Short Shirt, used to transport tea, departed from Guangzhou, detoured the Cape of Good Hope and returned to London. The whole journey took only 100 days. And how long is 100 days? 3 months and 10 days is 1/3 of the Dutch's 10-month sailing time. It is certain that if a clipper is used to take the Pacific route, it will take only more than a month from Panama to the southeast of China from east to west. Even if the return trip is not so smooth, more than 2 months is almost the same. Marin's consideration is when other countries are attracted by the African coastal route and do not set foot in the Pacific, he can boldly use clippers in the Pacific. In this way, sailing time can be greatly saved. Moreover, if other countries did not set foot in the Pacific Ocean, they would not have discovered the secret of the clipper. Then, they foolishly took the east and west coasts of Africa and the Indian Ocean, using the old-fashioned galleons. It seems that they don't even have galleons now, which took 3 times as long as the clipper. As for the Atlantic route, from the mainland to Panama, in order to keep it secret, Marin naturally used galleons. Moreover, this route is not stable, and there will definitely be many pirates in the future. Therefore, galleons that can be equipped with many cannons are the first choice for this route. As for the clipper, it is fast, but it cannot be equipped with cannons and has no self-defense ability. Therefore, it can only take remote routes and don't let people find out. Once a trade route to China in the Pacific Ocean is opened, Marin can foresee that China's silk, porcelain, and tea will bring him all kinds of huge profits. You know, the Spanish Manila galleon spends between 1 million and 3 million pesos on purchases from China every year. This peso is the silver dollar, which is called ocean in later generations. 1 million pesos is 1 million oceans. Specifically, each silver dollar contains about 24 grams of silver. According to the current gold-silver exchange rate of 1 to 12, it is 2 grams of gold. 1 million pesos is 2 million grams of gold, equivalent to 561,000 ducat gold coins. Moreover, this is just the purchase price. The price is higher when shipped to Europe. Marin read a piece of data in his previous life. That is, the Dutch bought the smuggled raw silk in Taiwan at a purchase price of 4 Dutch guilders per pound. If it is shipped back to Europe, the sales price will reach 16.6 Dutch guilders per pound, which is more than 4 times higher. In other words, the goods worth 1 million pesos shipped back to Europe may be sold for more than 4 million pesos, equivalent to more than 2.3 million gold coins. The specific profit is probably more than 1 million gold coins. Faced with such huge profits, how can Marin not be tempted? So he decided to open up China's trade route within 5 years. To this end, what he has to do now is to train a group of Chinese translators. Yes, train a group of Chinese translators. After all, now in the whole of East Frisia, or in the whole of Europe, only Marin knows Chinese. There are also 2 Mongolian doctors, Morigen and Bader, who know a little Datong dialect. However, sending a fleet to China for trade, it is impossible for oneself or 2 court doctors to go in person, right? Therefore, a group of translators must be trained. Marin has carefully considered this point. Dealing with the Ming dynasty is very complicated. First of all, language is a big problem. Among them, this can be divided into two situations. One is dealing with the government, and the other is dealing with the people. If you deal with the government, you need to know official language. The official language of the Ming dynasty is different from the Mandarin of later generations. The Mandarin of later generations was actually formed after the Qing dynasty entered the pass and absorbed many Manchu words. For example, Hutong is one of the words introduced by the Manchus. The official language of the Ming dynasty during this period was actually more based on the Nanjing accent. Because Nanjing is the capital of the Ming dynasty. At the beginning of the founding of the country, the Nanjing accent was also used as the national standard, refined pronunciation. Of course, after the Ming dynasty moved its capital to Beiping, the main residents of Beiping were a large number of officials and their families. In this national metropolis, the official, refined pronunciation naturally also influenced the local language. In other words, the Mandarin of later generations is actually a mixture of the official language of the Ming dynasty, the local dialect of Beiping, and the dialect of the Manchus who later entered the pass. Marin lived in Nanjing in his later life and found that there was no problem in communicating with local people in Mandarin. In other words, there was no problem in dealing with the Ming government in Mandarin. As for dealing with the people, it was troublesome. Because most of the people engaged in maritime trade were Fujian people and Guangdong people. These sea merchants who dared to violate the law and engage in smuggling were not scholars, so they naturally did not understand any official language. They only spoke Min and Cantonese. Marin did not understand Min and Cantonese, and at most he could sing a few Cantonese songs with a relatively high degree of popularity. However, if you want him to communicate with people in Cantonese, he would definitely be at a loss. Therefore, the plan that Marin finally decided was to communicate with the Ming government and use Mandarin and Ming official language. To this end, Marin ordered that in school, young people with better language talents should be selected and taught Mandarin by themselves. A few years later, they were sent to Huaxia as translators to engage in trade. As for the number of people, Marin temporarily set it at 30. No matter how many, he would not have the energy to teach. Moreover, if he wanted to teach this group of people, he had to write textbooks. For example, we also need to develop Chinese pinyin and other things. Then, we also need to develop a small dictionary similar to the Xinhua dictionary so that students can look it up by themselves. However, the amount of work required to compile this book is so huge. Ma Lin feels that he is being used like an animal. Chapter 155, Development of the Phelan Copper Mine. Long before the war with Denmark, Marin had the intention to help Sweden develop the copper mine in Phelan. Because Marin knew that Sweden had no source of financial income now. If it relied on Lübeck and his sponsorship alone, it would not be a problem. Therefore, Marin had already talked to old Sten Sture and provided manpower and equipment to help develop the super-large copper mine in Phelan. The income was divided 50-50. However, the investment in developing the copper mine was all from Marin. In fact, old Sten Sture did not realize that the Phelan copper mine was a super-large copper mine, but thought it was just an ordinary copper mine. Therefore, Marin felt a little embarrassed about the half-and-half split he asked for, and planned to only collect taxes. According to convention, the official European tax standard for precious metal deposits such as gold, silver, and copper is 10% to 20%. Marin planned to give half of the income to the Swedish government, which was naturally tax-free. In this way, Marin was equivalent to taking 30% less profit. However, he funded Sweden in disguise. So that Sweden has enough financial strength to deal with possible retaliation from Denmark. You know, Sweden is located at a high latitude, and only the southern part is suitable for some agriculture. As for the northern part, especially the area north of the Arctic Circle, the Swedes have never developed it. Only the Sami people live in the northern part. Under such circumstances, Sweden has basically no source of fiscal revenue. Therefore, Sweden looks much larger than Denmark, but its finances cannot catch up with Denmark. Even before the Quadruple Alliance attacked Denmark, the areas along the southern coast of Sweden suitable for agriculture and trade were under the control of the Danes. Originally, Sweden has never been a rival to Denmark until the French copper mine was developed, and Sweden had enough financial resources to organize an army to compete with Denmark. If it were not for the huge income from the French copper mine, the world-famous Gustav II would not have been able to participate in the 30 Years' War in Germany. After all, Sweden has no agriculture, no trade, and almost nothing. Without the support of the French copper mine, Sweden's finances would be almost a pile of that. Now Sweden, even if it has taken back the southern part from Denmark, However, the financial situation is still not good. Although there are some iron ore mining and smelting, the scale is not large and the profit is not much. There is more wood, but most of it is pine, and there is less oak. Pine is not as popular as oak, and is generally used to make furniture or extract rosin. Of course, pine can also be used to build decks and masts when building ships. The main reason is that oak is resistant to seawater corrosion, while pine is not resistant to seawater corrosion, and can only be used to build parts that are above the horizontal surface and not in contact with seawater. Long before returning from Copenhagen, Marin signed a written agreement with old Sten Sture. Marin sent people to develop the Faline copper mine, and half of the income went to the Swedish government. At the same time, the operation of the copper mine is tax-free. Because the mining tax is included in that half of the income. In addition, the Swedish government shall not interfere with the operation of the Faline copper mine. In this way, Marin can control the operation and sales of the Faline copper mine. Of course, if the Swedish government needs to purchase copper, Marin must supply it, and it must be supplied at a preferential price. Before, Marin had sent Kohler to Austria in the south to recruit engineers for copper mines and smelting. Austria is at the foot of the Alps, and there are many copper and silver mines. Therefore, there are many related craftsmen here. The southern region of Germany has always been a region with relatively developed handicrafts in Europe. The handicrafts and mining here are relatively developed in technology. Bohemia and Austria have always been important precious metal producing areas in Europe. The craftsmen here are also very skilled. Moreover, in Austria, Maximilian I mortgaged the largest copper mine in Europe at that time, the Tyrol copper mine, to Jacob Fugger, the richest man in the Holy Roman Empire, in the form of a mortgage loan. At this time, the price of copper in Europe was very expensive. Due to his merchant nature, Jacob Fugger believed that the price of copper in Europe was not high enough. The reason why the price of copper could not go up was that the copper output was too high. Therefore, Jacob Fugger, the richest man in the Holy Roman Empire, closed some mines and reduced the production of the Tyrol copper mine. In this way, the supply of copper is reduced, and the price will naturally rise. However, in this way, some engineers and miners of the Tyrol copper mine became unemployed. Taking this opportunity, the people sent by Kohler directly recruited those unemployed engineers with high salaries. In addition, some experienced miners were recruited to act as foremen and masters to guide the Swedes to mine in the French copper mine. After all, mining also requires experienced miners to lead and guide. Of course, mining is not that simple. Not only engineers and miners are needed, but also smelting equipment is needed to turn copper ore into copper. For this reason, Marin also got the most outdated blast furnace for smelting copper ore. The blast furnace, designed by Marin, is a simple blast furnace built in the back mountain of his hometown in the previous life during the Great Steelmaking period. It has a simple structure and occupies a small area. It is more versatile, not only can it make steel, but also can smelt non-ferrous metals such as copper. However, after the Great Steelmaking ended, this blast furnace was abandoned in the back mountain and became a tourist attraction. When Marin was a child, he often went to play on the bare top of the mountain behind him. Naturally, he remembered the structure of the blast furnace and often played with the bellows of the blast furnace. However, this manual blast furnace, which seemed extremely backward in the eyes of Marin and later generations, was a high-end equipment in Europe at that time. It was used to smelt copper and had a very good effect. Sweden had nothing else but a lot of wood, and it was very convenient to burn charcoal. At that time, it would be very convenient to use charcoal as a reducing agent in the blast furnace. The only inconvenience was probably the traffic problem. Sweden was a relatively late developed area, and there were relatively few Roman roads. Moreover, it was said that the Faroe Islands area was located in the central area of Sweden, with mountains and water. The bad thing was that there were mountains and water. Because it was difficult to build roads. Therefore, no one discovered and developed the copper mine in Faroe Islands for a long time. Only in the coastal plains was the population of Sweden relatively dense. Therefore, if we only develop the Fallon copper mine, it will be a big problem if we don't solve the transportation problem. But who cares? As long as we set up a large number of blast furnaces in the Fallon area and smelt the copper, it doesn't matter if the transportation cost is a bit high. Because copper is also considered a precious metal in Europe at this time, and it is expensive. According to the intelligence sent back by the men sent to Sweden, the nearest city to the Fallon area is Gävle, a port in eastern Sweden, which is only a few dozen kilometers away from Fallon. However, even in these few dozen kilometers, there are mountains and lakes everywhere. It seems that it is not easy to open a road from Fallon to Gavel. However, as long as this road is built, the development of the Fallon copper mine will be easy. Because there are blast furnaces and a group of highly skilled craftsmen directing the reasonable mining. It is certain that the copper output of the Fallon copper mine in the future will definitely not be low. As long as the road is unobstructed, it can be transported to Gavel and directly shipped to East Frisia. Whether it is used for casting cannons or other functions, it is a very good choice. Moreover, if you sell it, the profit is also considerable. After all, the price of copper in Europe is so expensive now. Although the cost of buying copper from India may be lower. But the problem is that the cycle to India is too long, nearly 2 years to go back and forth. If you need copper urgently, you may not be able to wait. This is also an important reason why Marin asked the fertilizer processing plant to add a process of collecting saltpeter. Moreover, ocean transportation is not very safe. If the copper ship encounters a big storm and unfortunately sinks, it will be dumbfounded. Therefore, it is necessary to develop a large copper mine in Europe. In this way, it can also ensure that there will be no shortage of copper. Even if the copper ship to India has an accident, there will be no big problem. Chapter 156, Going to North America to make paper. Granada finally produced sugar. A batch of brown sugar produced in Granada was shipped back to East Frisia to supply the consumption of the Auric Palace. In fact, sugarcane cultivation in Granada is still expanding. Because sugarcane nodes can be used to cultivate sugarcane seedlings, most of the harvested sugarcane is used to continue to cultivate sugarcane seedlings and then expand the planting. However, it is not good to not produce sugar all the time. According to convention, if there is no profit, those European nobles will definitely be very angry. In fact, Marin was not so short-sighted. George, the governor of Granada, still selected a batch of sugarcane that did not grow well to make sugar. In the end, the ship returning to Emden port brought back 20 bags of rice for Marin to make fried rice with eggs, 20 bags of ginger, used as spices and condiments, 20 bags of soybeans, used, well, Marin took them to grind soy milk and make tofu. Finally, there were 5 bags of sucrose, brown sugar. However, Marin was a little surprised about the packaging of these goods. Rice, ginger and soybeans were packed in sacks, which was fine. But why did those sucroses have to be packed in animal skin bags? Don't you know that animal skins are expensive? There is no problem with transporting sucrose in small batches, but Marin wants to make sucrose into an industry in the future. In this way, it is easy to package sucrose, and the cost also needs to be controlled. Otherwise, the pocket value is too high, isn't it annoying? After all, sucrose will still be available to the public in the end. It's too extravagant to use animal skin bags to pack sugar cane. Why not use oil paper to pack sugar cane? Marin asked the bald Captain Aben who was in charge of the American route. In Marin's cognition, there were no plastic bags in this era, so it was naturally best to use moisture-proof oil paper bags. Aben scratched his bald head, thought for a while and said, "Sir, the price of oil paper is not cheaper than animal skin." Ah! Marin was stunned, and then he found Kohler and asked him to send someone to inquire. Sure enough, after Kohler's people came back, they told Marin that the price of oil paper was really not cheaper than animal skin, and it was not as strong as animal skin. Marin vaguely remembered that the current papermaking technology in Europe was probably the early papermaking technology learned by Arabs during the Tang dynasty. That is, the method of making paper with raw materials such as rags, fishing nets, and bark. However, the price of European cloth is very expensive, and using rags as raw materials. It would be a ghost if the cost of paper is not high. At this time, bamboo paper had become popular in the Ming dynasty. Bamboo paper is made by soaking bamboo in a lime pond for more than 100 days, and then making paper after it has rotted. Bamboo is everywhere in China, especially in the south. Moreover, bamboo grows very fast and the raw materials are easy to obtain. Therefore, the cost of Chinese paper is much lower than that of paper made from rags and fishing nets in Europe. It was not until the Qianlong period that the French missionary Jiang Yuren, formerly known as Benoit Michel, stole the secret of papermaking in China, drew a picture of the new papermaking technique, and sent it back to Paris. As of now, the price of European paper is really not cheap. So much so that when the nobles signed documents, they simply used parchment, which is a little more expensive than paper, but more durable. Moreover, when it comes to the current oil paper in Europe, the cost is even higher. Because the popular oil paper in Europe is butter paper. How expensive is butter? In this era of lack of oil and water, the price of butter Paper is expensive in Europe, and with butter soaking, the price is even more expensive, basically the same as animal skin. But animal skin is not only waterproof, but also stronger. Therefore, when transporting sugarcane, Europeans simply used animal skin bags. Marin suddenly remembered something. He seemed to have planned to use local forest resources to make paper on Cape Breton Island. To this end, he also sent people to Egypt to buy the sodium sulfate, needed for pulping. However, he was busy with the war before and almost forgot about it. So he quickly found relevant personnel and asked about the purchase of sodium sulfate. As a result, Marin was told that the ship to Egypt had bought dozens of bags of sodium sulfate and found a stable supplier. As long as there is a need, you can buy hundreds or thousands of bags of sodium sulfate from him. However, Marin never mentioned the purchase of sodium sulfate later, and the papermaking was delayed. The ship to Egypt was only concerned with buying natural soda and no longer increased the purchase of sodium sulfate. In fact, now on Cape Breton Island, the coal mine in the North Sydney mine area north of Sydney Bay has been discovered and has begun to be developed. Moreover, Cape Breton Island, including most of North America, is a densely jungle area. Developing the papermaking industry in North America is definitely the best choice. There are unlimited trees here, plus the coal mines on Cape Breton Island, and the cooking catalyst purchased from Egypt, Glauber's salt. Marin can easily let people set up a big pot on Cape Breton Island and cook as much pulp as they want. Canada in later generations is the world's largest pulp producer. Of course, the container for cooking pulp is not an ordinary big pot. Instead, it requires a steel digester with good sealing. After the digester is sealed, the water vapor cannot be emitted during cooking, and high pressure is formed in the digester. Then, the temperature rises. In this way, within a few hours, the wood chips can be boiled into pulp that can be used to make paper. Using the traditional method, making bamboo paper requires more than 100 days of soaking the bamboo in the lime pond. After soaking, it needs to be put into a big pot and boiled for 7 or 8 days. During the more than 100 days of soaking the bamboo, the papermakers had nothing to do and had to do something else. After the bamboo is soaked, they can boil it in the pot and officially start work. Using modern chemical pulping, sodium sulfate is used as a cooking catalyst, and a sealed high-pressure cooker is used. Put the wood cut into small pieces into the cooker. As long as the high-pressure cooking is done for 2 to 4 hours, pulp can be obtained. In comparison, the efficiency is hundreds or thousands of times worse. Using the most advanced bamboo papermaking method in the world, it takes at least 120 days to obtain pulp that can be used to make paper. Using the chemical pulping method of later generations, using a wider range of wood than bamboo, pulp can be obtained in just 1 day. Even less than 1 day, half a day will do. In other words, when the papermaking craftsmen of the Ming dynasty made one piece of paper, the workers using modern methods may have made hundreds or thousands of pieces of paper. With such efficiency, plus the fact that North American wood is free and can be cut at will. Therefore, Marin can be sure that as long as he starts making paper, the cost of paper made by his paper mill will be very low, lower than the cost of paper in the Ming dynasty. In the Ming dynasty, the price of paper was about 1 coin per sheet. The cost of paper made by Marin using modern technology must be much lower than this. By then, such low-cost paper, made into oil paper, must be not expensive. By then, Marin will have the conditions to popularize oil paper bag packaging. Moreover, the textbooks used in East Frisian schools can be done by everyone. Unlike now, many children are still learning Fei and writing on the sand table with branches. And because the North American colonies produce a lot of whale oil, even if it is to make oil paper, it does not need to use expensive butter, but can be soaked in whale oil. In this way, the price of oil paper produced in Cape Breton Island must be very cheap. By then, the sugar produced in Grenada and Cuba, which is about to be developed, can be packaged in oil paper. It is cheap and has good moisture-proof effect. For this reason, Marin personally organized craftsmen to build a large-scale pulp cooking cooker, which is sealed and has a lid similar to a tank lid on the top. Around the lid, cowhide is put to ensure that the container is as airtight as possible during cooking, increase the pressure inside, and increase the cooking temperature. However, the first time it was cooked, the iron bolt of the lid was not made firmly, causing the lid to be blown off by the high pressure of the cooker, and there was a huge explosion. Fortunately, the iron cover flew to a deserted place. Otherwise, if it hit Marin who came to watch, it would change history. After improvement, the craftsmen used high-carbon steel bolts that can withstand high tensile force for the lid of the cooker. In this way, no matter how high the pressure in the cooker is, the iron cover will not be blown off. Unless the pressure inside the digester reaches a level that can cause the digester made of pure steel to explode. But that possibility is extremely low. After the digester was successfully built, Marin ordered people to load it onto a ship and transport it to Cape Breton Island. At the same time, Marin also allocated a group of papermakers and lumberjacks who had signed a death indenture to go to Cape Breton Island to make paper. Those lumberjacks were naturally responsible for cutting trees and splitting logs into small wood chips for boiling in the digester. And those papermakers were responsible for remixing the pulp after it was cooked and making paper. Then, take the wood boards covered with pulp out to dry. When they are dried, the papermakers can peel off sheets of paper from the wood boards. However, considering that the salt boiling base should be transferred to Cape Breton Island, and the wastewater pollution of papermaking is large, especially chemical pulping. Therefore, Marin decided that the papermaking base would not be placed in Sydney Bay, but at the northern end of Cape Breton Island. In this way, even if the wastewater produced by the paper mill is discharged into the sea, it will not affect the salt boiling in Sydney Bay. This is because the ocean current on the east coast of North America, that is, the North Atlantic Current, flows from south to north. If the paper mill peninsula is placed at the northernmost part of Cape Breton Island, the wastewater produced by the paper mill will not affect the salt boiling base upstream. Otherwise, the salt boiling base uses polluted seawater, and the salt boiled will have problems. Chapter 157, Relocation of the Old Salt Boiling Base. While preparing for the paper mill on Cape Breton Island, Marin simply solved the problem of relocation of the salt boiling base. At present, Marin has two salt boiling bases, the Salt City Salt Boiling Base on Texel Island and the new Salt City Salt Boiling Base on Baltrum Island. Among them, the old salt boiling center of Texel Island, Salt City, relies on coal briquettes, balls made by mixing coal powder with yellow mud, shipped from Hoffman Estate near Bochum City as fuel. Therefore, it is more dependent on coal briquettes shipped from the coal mine of Hoffman Estate on the Ruhr River via the Rhine River. The new Salt City on Baltrum Island relies on coal imported from the Newcastle coal mine in England across the sea. In terms of cost, the coal briquettes imported from Hoffman Estate are sold at a family price of only 1.5 shillings per charter long, about 1.5 tons to 1.7 tons of coal, and the total cost is only 2 shillings per charter long. But the coal imported from Newcastle, England, has a purchase price of up to 4 shillings per charter long. If we only consider the cost, we will naturally close the new Salt City on Baltrum Island and keep the old Salt City on Texel Island. However, it is not calculated in this way. Because, whether the new Salt City uses the family price coal from its own coal mine or the coal imported from Newcastle, England, the profit of boiling salt is extremely high. In particular, Marin also used a wood-saving stove in the salt boiling base, which made the salt boiling efficiency higher. If we consider the cost alone, Texel Island naturally has the advantage. But if we consider confidentiality, Baltrum Island has an absolute advantage. Because Baltrum Island is on the seashore of the East Frisian state. And it is a remote place. In the past, because the Jever area was a little to the east, there was a risk of leaks. But now Jever also belongs to Marin's control area. Marin can easily set up a restricted area near Baltrum Island and prohibit people from approaching at will. Moreover, after returning from Denmark, Marin also arranged several 250-level warships to patrol near Baltrum Island to ensure that there was no enemy invasion. In this way, the salt boiling base on Baltrum Island, the new Salt City, is very safe. But the earliest salt boiling center, the old Salt City on Texel Island, is often watched by Dutch fishermen because it is too close to the Dutch area on the mainland. If the salt boiling center had not built a tall wall, perhaps the salt boiling secrets of the old Salt City would have been leaked long ago. In fact, there are many people interested in the old Salt City. Coupled with the last incident in the Principality of Guedes where the coal-carrying ship was not seized, Marin felt more and more that it was too unsafe to boil salt on Texel Island. After all, Texel Island is only a few kilometers away from the Dutch part of the European continent. Moreover, the Maars waterway to the south of Texel Island is also an important route for Amsterdam merchant ships to enter and exit, and it is too crowded. Although the old Salt City has built a tall wall to block the sight of outsiders. However, the black smoke from the large number of wood-saving stoves that boil salt every day is indeed eye-catching. If Marin had not banned outsiders from setting foot on Texel Island except for the port of Thoranger, the secrets of the old Salt City would have been discovered long ago. Even the garrison on the island, mainly the guards of the old Salt City, has killed a total of 32 foreign peepers so far, and caused some diplomatic disputes. So, after thinking about it, Marin finally made a decision to move the personnel and equipment of the old Salt City on Texel Island to Cape Breton Island as a whole. In this way, those peepers would have no way to find out Marin's secrets. Then, Marin asked these salt-boiling workers to cook salt on Cape Breton Island, far away in America, and then ship it back to Europe. Who can figure out everything? Anyway, in this war against Denmark, Marin was allocated 150 merchant ships with sufficient capacity. No matter how many people or equipment, they can be easily transported to Cape Breton Island. At the same time, it is also very convenient to transport the products of Cape Breton Island back to Europe. However, since the salt-boiling base on Texel Island has been removed, there is no need for the Hoffman Manor coal mine near Bochum to supply coal briquettes. This is indeed a blow to the hundreds of miners and surf workers who shake coal briquettes in Hoffman Manor. After all, once the Texel Island salt-boiling center no longer needs them to provide coal briquettes, it will also affect the production of the Hoffman Manor coal mine. The lives of those serfs who make a living by digging coal and shaking coal briquettes will also be affected. After thinking about it, Marin decided to send more than 100 miners and coal-shaking workers in the Hoffman Manor coal mine to the North Sydney coal mine on Cape Breton Island, where they will dig coal again and supply the new salt-boiling center. Speaking of which, the coal-shaking briquettes done by the serfs who shake coal briquettes in the Hoffman Manor coal mine at this time are actually considered to be advanced technology, ahead of their time in Europe at this time. Yes, you read that right, shaking coal briquettes can indeed be considered advanced technology in Europe at this time. Because, although Europe has begun to use coal in this era, it is still at the stage of using coal blocks. As for coal powder, most of them are discarded, or a little is sprinkled when burning coal blocks to help combustion. The reason is that there is no space between the coal powder to accommodate air. Coal combustion requires air. Therefore, the gaps between coal blocks are large, so it is easier to burn. Coal powder, however, is not easy to burn. Therefore, at this time, Europe mainly used coal blocks and threw away most of the coal powder, which was very wasteful. But at this time, China had already developed the technology of shaking coal balls. The powdered coal powder was added with a small amount of yellow mud and water, and then shaken into a round ball, and then dried to become a coal ball. When the coal balls were piled together and burned, the gaps between the balls were naturally large, and there was enough air, so they burned better naturally, which was better than coal blocks. Therefore, the technology of shaking coal balls, although inconspicuous, is also an important invention in human history. The Chinese used coal relatively early, and the distribution of Chinese coal was relatively wide, so the research on coal was naturally ahead of Europe. In the early days, the Chinese first made coal powder into coal cakes to imitate the appearance of coal blocks. However, later, they found that rubbing the coal powder into a ball seemed to have a better burning effect. Then, coal balls appeared, and they were still used until the 21st century. Of course, in the 1930s, more advanced honeycomb coal emerged, replacing most of the market share of coal balls, and became a very popular existence in the 21st century. However, honeycomb coal also has limitations. That is, although honeycomb coal is easy to use, it is only suitable for family water boiling and cooking. To burn a large stove, you still have to rely on coal blocks and coal balls. Of course, if there is a blower, you can also burn coal powder directly. When the coal powder is blown up by the blower, the combustion effect is much better than coal blocks and coal balls. So, Marin realized at this moment that the dirty coal ball shaking technology of Hoffman Manor coal mine was actually the most advanced coal application technology in Europe. Fortunately, the coal ball shaking workers in Hoffman Manor were all serfs who signed a death contract and could not easily leave the coal mine in Hoffman Manor. Otherwise, this advanced technology would have been known to other coal mines in the Ruhr area long ago. If they mastered this advanced technology, wouldn't the profits of other coal mines in the Ruhr area double? Because more than half of the coal powder could finally be put to good use. Of course, Marin would not give them this opportunity. While ordering the establishment of the Cape Breton Island paper mill, Marin also ordered the coal miners and coal briquette workers in Hoffman Manor to board the ship, bring their families, and go to Cape Breton Island to live and work. At present, the coal mine in Hoffman Manor is managed by Schwartz's father, Quinny Lang. Since Marin took over the East Frisian county, the members of the Hoffman family left Hoffman Manor and moved to the East Frisian county. The only two people left at Hoffman Manor were old Quincy, who was the gatekeeper, and Quinny Lang, who was in charge of the coal mine. However, because all the miners and coal briquette workers and their families in the Hoffman Manor coal mine were to be taken away, Quinny Lang would naturally go with them. Marin planned to hand over the North Sydney coal mine on Cape Breton Island to Quinny Lang. Because Schwartz's father, Quinny Lang, was also from an aristocratic family, he was literate, knew how to calculate, and could keep accounts. In addition, he had 7 or 8 years of experience in coal mine management, so handing the new coal mine over to him would be a good use of his talents. Moreover, not many of Marin's men were literate, so it was difficult to find someone to replace old Lang. Before leaving, Quinny Lang suddenly found Marin and asked him for something. "Sir, I beg you, please help Schwartz." Looking at the distressed old Lang, Marin was surprised. What happened to Schwartz? "Nothing, it's just that he's 29 years old and hasn't married yet. I'm very worried." Marin suddenly realized, but what he was thinking in his heart was, "Old Lang, you don't know that in the future, so many people are over 30, approaching 40, and still haven't married. It's okay for people like the useless writer, Taishan Laonyo, who can't get married. There are many capable men or women who are not in a hurry to get married. Like the charming sister Jiling, she's 43 and is about to reach menopause, but she hasn't married yet. Schwartz hasn't even reached 30 yet, what's the hurry?" But of course, he can't say that to Quinny Lang. If he told the old man, he would be so angry that he would faint, or even die. So, Marin assured Quinny Lang, "Don't worry, I will definitely find Schwartz an outstanding noble lady as his wife." Then, Quinny Lang set off with a look of relief, to America. In fact, Schwartz was still unmarried at the age of 29, purely because of his high standards. There were so many Italian beauties, Danish girls, and Mao girls, but Schwartz didn't like them. It's not that these girls are not good-looking, but Schwartz looks at their backgrounds. If they are not of noble birth, Schwartz doesn't like them. Colin is in sharp contrast with him in this regard. When Colin saw the beautiful Italian country girl, he directly carried 2 big breasts and ran away, while Schwartz was reserved and naturally remained single. But he also has the capital to be reserved. After all, Schwartz is now the #1 general under Marin and a diamond bachelor. However, this time, after taking over the earldom of Oldenburg and the Principality of Schleswig, it seems that there are many noble families. They should be able to select a noble girl who meets Schwartz's requirements, right? Of course, this noble must not be a noble who opposes Marin. Otherwise, if Schwartz married the daughter of a traitor, he would be in a dilemma. Therefore, after watching the ship that old Lang took leave, Marin decided that after Schwartz returned from Italy, he would hold a court ball and invite the nobles of the earldom of Oldenburg and the duchy of Schleswig who had surrendered to him to bring their unmarried daughters. Schwartz and several other officers from knight families who wanted to marry noble girls would choose the noble girls they liked. Of course, as the first general, Schwartz had the priority to mate. Ugh. The right to choose. Chapter 158 The Sailors' Priority Act and the Establishment of a Shipping Company. When planning to build a paper mill and salt-making center on Cape Breton Island, Marin found that the 150 cogs that he had looted from Denmark really helped him a lot. Whether it was transporting people or goods, everything was not a problem in front of 150 cogs. However, the ships were not a problem, but the sailors were. Mainly, 150 cogs required 20 to 40 sailors on each ship. In this way, these 150 sailing ships would require at least 5,000 sailors. The East Frisian country where Marin was located could only recruit about 4,000 young fishermen. Moreover, these 4,000 people had been divided up by 2,000 people, including gunners, from the 8 warships, 15 250-class warships and 17 carracks that Marin currently owned. In other words, the sailor gap in the captured Danish merchant ships has reached about 3,000 people. Fortunately, the coastal areas of the newly conquered Oldenburg County and the Jeva region are mostly inhabited by Frisians. Even the west coast of the Duchy of Schleswig and the Dithmarschen region are mostly inhabited by Frisian fishermen. Therefore, Marin intends to recruit young Frisian fishermen in the Jeva region, the coast of the Oldenburg County and the west coast of the Duchy of Schleswig to serve as sailors and steer these merchant ships. To this end, Marin called in 5 people who stayed in the capital Auric from the 13 Guardians, the nickname of the first batch of 13 Cologne University students recruited at the University of Cologne 3 years ago to discuss. Then, with the help of these 5 college students, Marin formulated the famous Sailor Priority Act. In the future, this bill will provide Marin with a large number of sailors, so that a large number of Marin's warships will roam the world, and scare the pirates away. The bill stipulates that the tax rate for ordinary fishermen is 30% of the catch, not including the church's tithe, and the salt used to pickle salted fish paid as taxes can be reimbursed, but not in advance. However, if there are young people in the family serving the navy as sailors, and serving for merchant ships under Marin's name, the tax rate for the whole family will be reduced to 20% during the service. In addition, the family can advance the salt needed for pickling salted fish. If you die in battle, the preferential policy will be extended for 10 to 20 years, depending on the age of the deceased. In addition, the bank that Marin originally held to support fishermen, that is, the bank that provided loans to poor fishermen to buy large fishing boats, has also changed its policy and announced it in the Sailor Priority Act from now on. Only families with young and strong people serving the navy or directly serving merchant ships under Marin's name will be provided with loans. Families without young and strong men serving the navy and Marin's merchant ships will no longer enjoy the loan policy. The promulgation of the Sailors' Priority Act symbolizes that Marin divides fishermen into two types of people: those who serve Marin, including those who have served Marin, and those who do not. Fishermen's families serving Marin will enjoy various preferential policies and can also borrow money to buy large fishing boats to increase their income. They can also advance salt for pickling salted fish. This is very important, because without enough salt, you can't pickle enough salted fish. In that case, no matter how many fish you catch, if there is not enough salt, some fish will only rot. Fishermen's families who do not serve Marin will become ordinary taxpayers. If you want to buy a large fishing boat, you can only rely on your own affordability. But the profit from selling salted fish is very low, and it will take a long time to save enough money to buy a new large fishing boat. The policy of borrowing money to buy fishing boats will no longer benefit them. Moreover, they cannot advance salt for pickling salted fish, and can only pay for salt themselves for pickling salted fish. If there is not enough money and salt cannot be bought, even if more fish are caught, it is a waste. Because there is no salt for pickling. From then on, as time goes by, the families of fishermen who have sailors serving Marin will get better and better. Although those who do not have sailors serving Marin live better than before being ruled by Marin, they are not much better. The biggest difference between the two is the qualification for loan to buy a large fishing boat and whether salt can be advanced. Only with a larger fishing boat can the harvest be greater. And the advance payment of salt can allow fishermen to have enough salt to pickle salted fish. Otherwise, without enough salt, even if you have a large fishing boat and catch a lot of fish, it is useless. Without enough salt, the extra fish can only rot and stink. Although young and strong fishermen are not forcibly conscripted as sailors, after the promulgation of the Sailor Priority Act, it will use benefits to force those families with young and strong fishermen to rush to serve the navy and Marin's fleet. Moreover, the Sailors' Priority Act was actually aimed at the Frisian fishermen in the newly controlled Jeva region, the coast of the county of Oldenburg, and the west coast of the Principality of Schleswig. As for Dithmarschen, well, because of Marin's capture last time, the two sides reached an agreement, and Marin allowed them to be autonomous. The total number of Frisian fishermen in these areas is estimated to be about 40,000, which is a huge number. It should not be a problem to recruit 5,000 or 6,000 sailors from them. During the formulation and promulgation of the Sailors' Priority Act, Marin naturally consulted Amerigo, who was helping Marin train captains at the captain's school. Amerigo had no opinion on the new bill, but he had his own opinion on the 150 merchant ships seized from Denmark. The batch of ships was docked at the newly built dock near Emden, and Amerigo went to see it. He believed that among these 150 ships, only the 60 cogs with a displacement of more than 200 tons were worth using for ocean voyages. Other ships with a displacement of less than 200 tons are still a bit dangerous to sail in the Atlantic. Moreover, with Marin's current trade scale, even the 60 cogs of more than 200 tons may not be used, not to mention the 90 cogs of less than 200 tons. Marin was embarrassed. He wanted to use all the 150 captured ships, but he didn't consider whether the trade volume of the Chamber of Commerce under his name could use so many ships. Even 60 merchant ships of more than 200 tons are very scary. Because the total cargo capacity of these 60 ships, when fully loaded, will reach more than 7,000 tons. Does Marin have so much cargo to transport? The answer is no. So, Marin finally selected the 60 cogs of more than 200 tons and formed a shipping company under his control for trade transportation and troop transportation. Of course, it is also responsible for transportation between the mainland and the colonies. As for the 90 small boats with a displacement of less than 200 tons, how about you sell them as large fishing boats for the Fisherman Loan to Buy Large Boats project to qualified fishermen? Amerigo suggested. A ship of more than 100 tons may be considered a small boat in the ocean trade. However, in the eyes of those Frisian fishermen, it is definitely a large ship, and it is fully qualified to go fishing in the depths of the North Sea. Unlike now, most Frisian fishermen are still using small boats of more than 10 tons to fish in the near sea. Even in the future, fishing boats with a displacement of more than 100 tons are not small. After thinking about it, Marin finally made a decision. It's a good idea, let's do it. Of these 90 ships, I plan to send 20 to Cape Breton Island and the Twin Islands, and send a group of fishermen over there to participate in fishing. As for the other 70, they will be sold at a discount to those fishermen who meet the loan conditions and buy large ships with loans. In this way, Marin decisively disposed of 90 small boats with a displacement of less than 200 tons, and only retained 60 cog sailing ships with a displacement of more than 200 tons as merchant ships of the newly established Hoffman Shipping Company. In this way, the problem of insufficient sailors that Marin was worried about was immediately solved. Because 2/3 of the ships were cut off, the remaining 1/3 of the ships were completely sufficient with the existing sailors, and just enough. In fact, Marin looked down on these 60 cog sailing ships of more than 200 tons. Because, in his mind, the galleons of more than 500 tons are the most suitable merchant ships. However, he doesn't have any galleons now. The only few are still warships. Only when enough galleons are built can those cog sailing ships be slowly replaced. And it is a very good way to sell the eliminated cog sailing ships cheaply to those qualified fishermen. In this way, it can also support the development of fisheries. You know, in those days, there weren't many large fishing boats on the sea, and the fishery resources were very rich. Moreover, in those days, because the church had many rules and there were many festivals in a year where people were not allowed to eat meat, selling salted fish was also very popular. Chapter 159, Horse Farm. After finishing a bunch of official business, Marin returned to the harem. After visiting the pregnant Felice, Marin went to find his son Caesar. After not seeing each other for half a year, Caesar and Marin had become more distant. It was not until he had a beard that Caesar recognized that the man in front of him was his rake. Looking at his lovely son, Marin liked it so much. However, while playing, Marin suddenly heard little Caesar shouting, "Big horse, I want to ride a big horse." Then, he looked at Marin's back eagerly. Marin's face suddenly turned black. This stinky boy actually wanted to ride me as a big horse, and his little PP was itchy. As soon as Angela explained, Marin realized that the game of riding a big horse was invented by Marin's fake father-in-law Old Nelson. Old Nelson knew that he was a fake father-in-law, so he naturally kept his duty. However, in order to confuse the outside world, at Marin's request, Old Nelson and his wife would visit their daughter and grandson in the palace once a month. Because they were fake father-in-law and mother-in-law, the Old Nelson couple naturally flattered Angela and little Caesar. So, in order to please little Caesar, Old Nelson disregarded his face and lay down for Caesar to ride as a big horse. Not to mention, this game is very popular with little Caesar. Then, facing Marin, little Caesar actually wanted to ride one. Although Marin liked his son, he rejected Caesar's request. As the king of a country, it would be very embarrassing if he was ridden by his son. Moreover, Marin always believed that boys should not be spoiled too much. Some rude requests should be rejected when they should be rejected. When it is time to clean up, you can't be soft-handed. Otherwise, when you grow up, it is easy to become a scourge. Many hooligans and scum are actually spoiled by their parents. When you see your children make mistakes, you don't correct or educate them. Over time, they will become extremely self-centered bastards. Therefore, after rejecting little Caesar's unreasonable request, Marin still ignored it when he saw tears in little Caesar's eyes. Even when little Caesar was about to show off his singing voice, Marin stretched out his hand and glared at little Caesar with a threatening look. Then, little Caesar didn't dare to howl. Bad. When Marin left, he could vaguely hear little Caesar's low protest from behind. Hearing this, Marin almost fell accidentally. "Damn, I went out to fight for you, but you called me bad. I can't do it, I'm injured." Coming to Felice's room, Marin sought comfort for a while. However, Felice was pregnant, and Marin couldn't do anything to her. Wanting to do something with Angela, little Caesar always made trouble and didn't give Marin a chance. "Stinky boy, I have to find you a nanny like Rome Mama, and then prick you with a needle every day." Bored, Marin went to the stable in a depressed area and visited his warhorse Karl. Unexpectedly, Karl didn't have time to pay attention to himself. He was looking for a mare and doing shameful things. Seeing Marin coming, he didn't have time to pay attention to Marin, but just snorted, and then continued to have sex with Ma Maisie. Damn! Am I abandoned by the whole world? Marin was stunned. Then, he had to go and drink with Morigen and Bader, two Mongolian men. Coincidentally, Morigen and Bader were drinking, and then Marin took a cup and joined in. The two Mongolian men drank whiskey from Scotland, which is a rare strong liquor in Europe. As for the beer produced in Germany, the two Mongolian uncles said the degree is too low, we can't get used to it. Although they have medical alcohol in their hands, they can mix strong liquor. However, the alcohol has lost its aroma, only the smell of alcohol is left, and it is not pleasant to drink. It has to be brewed wine to feel it. In this regard, Marin told them that when the sugarcane production in Granada is large, he can find someone to brew a kind of strong liquor called rum, which is about the same strength as whiskey, but has a sweet aroma. The two big men were naturally overjoyed and urged Marin to quickly make this good wine. While drinking, Morigen suddenly asked, "My lord, I heard that the Crimean Khan Munchire Khan gave you 100 Mongolian horses." "Yes, when I was on a diplomatic mission to Crimea, Munchire Khan did give me 100 Mongolian horses. Of course, they are not pure Mongolian horses, but Mongolian horses mixed with local horses in Eastern Europe. Real Mongolian horses are not that tall. My lord is really knowledgeable. You actually know that the Mongolian horses on the Mongolian grasslands are shorter." Morigen and Bader were surprised. They came from the Mongolian grasslands, so they naturally knew that the original Mongolian horses were shorter. However, Marin had never been to China, so how could he know? "Didn't I tell you? My teacher Einstein has traveled all over the world, and there is nothing he doesn't know." Marin set a pot, and let Einstein carry it firmly. "Mr. AI is really knowledgeable." Morigen and Bader were full of admiration. I have kept those 100 Mongolian horses in Oldenburg. They are all uncastrated horses and can be bred. I'm waiting to get more Mongolian horses from Eastern Europe in the future." Morigen and Bader were both a little surprised. Bader asked, "Sir, even the Mongolian horses in Crimea are shorter than the big horses you Europeans ride. Generally speaking, Europeans don't like those short horses. What do you think? That kind of tall horse is only used by knights in plate armor. However, since the emergence of muskets, knights in plate armor are also doomed to die. Therefore, it is better to develop light cavalry. Light cavalry does not need tall horses, Eastern European Mongolian horses will do." After a pause, Marin said, "Moreover, the best thing about Mongolian horses is that they are easy to raise. Just put them on the grassland and eat some grass. They are not like European horses that are so delicate and have to eat oats. Your Excellency has a good idea." Morigen and Bader were both impressed. They were really impressed, not flattering. Of course. How can you Mongolians mobilize hundreds of thousands of cavalry at any time? Isn't it because Mongolian horses can withstand rough feeding? For Europeans who feed war horses with fine feed, the cost of feeding is too high and it is difficult to scale up. Ordinary countries can't even muster tens of thousands of cavalry. In the whole of Western Europe, only a few countries such as France can muster tens of thousands of cavalry, mainly because they can't afford so many war horses. However, poor Crimea can easily muster 40,000 elite cavalry. Why? Isn't it because Mongolian horses are easy to raise? Yes, after hearing what you said, I also miss Mongolian horses. Back then, on the Mongolian grasslands, my brothers and I rode Mongolian horses, drank kumis, and slept with wild Mongolian girls. How I miss it. Bader said nostalgically. Yeah, I really want to go back to the Mongolian grasslands to take a look. Morigen also sighed. Don't even think about it. The Chahar tribe is in its heyday. You are the enemy of the Chahar tribe. When you go back, you will probably be like Jamuka, wrapped in a blanket and trampled by horses. At this point, the two Mongolian men were silent. By the way, since you like Mongolian horses, how about I put those 100 Eastern European Mongolian horses in the horse farm in the north of the city? How about you come and see them from time to time? In this way, riding a Mongolian horse can also relieve your homesickness. Ma Lin suddenly remembered that the two Mongolian doctors in front of him were a combination of human medicine and veterinary medicine. In fact, in terms of veterinary medicine, they may be the best in the world. If the horses are taken care of by them, there will be no problem. Sir, we are court doctors now. However, we can let the disciples take care of those horses. When I have nothing to do, I also want to ride them. No problem, I will order the construction of a new horse farm on the grassland in the east of the city to raise Mongolian horses. Ma Lin knew very well that the disciples that Morigen and Bader were talking about were not those poor students who were sent to castrate pigs, but those top-level students. Only those top-level students would Morigen and Bader admit that they were disciples. As for those poor students, neither of them was willing to admit that they were registered students. It was reassuring for Marin to have the students who were valued by the two to take care of the Mongolian horses. To be honest, Marin really envied the Mongolians and Tatar's ability to easily pull out tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen. This ability was a bit scary. Although Mongolian horses have the disadvantages of short legs and slow sprint speed, they are numerous and the cost of raising them is extremely low. Relying on the numerical advantage of cavalry, you can be killed by a pile. The Russian Empire, which later rose, also relied on this Eastern European Mongolian horse, which was later called the Don River horse, and the Cossack cavalry that matched it to occupy the entire Siberia and the Central Asian steppes, and also extended its poisonous hands to China. If it relied on those delicate horses in Europe, it would probably freeze to death halfway before it finished Siberia. For example, the Arabian horse, which was popular in later generations, is fast and has good endurance. But it is not cold-resistant. The wealthy people in the north who bought Arabian horses would lock them up in the house and turn on the heater to keep them warm in winter. If they were left in the wild, they would freeze to death. Only authentic Mongolian horses and Eastern European Mongolian horses can adapt to the cold winter in Siberia and northern China. After drinking, Marin left drunk. The next morning, Marin immediately sent someone to Oldenburg to tell them to bring back the 100 Eastern European Mongolian horses. At the same time, a new horse farm was also being built in the east of Aurich. Chapter 160, Recruiting College Students Again. After Heidel arrived in Oldenburg as the palace minister, he found that few of the nobles of the earldom of Oldenburg passed the administrative assessment. In other words, most of these nobles are just a bunch of useless people who only know aristocratic etiquette, drink, dance, and pretend all day long. Those who are really proficient in administrative business are often small officials who are born as minor nobles or simply civilians. Of course, those small civilian officials all appear in the government as assistants. Usually, as assistants, they are responsible for handling government affairs. And those nobles who are in full positions are responsible for pretending. Finally, after waiting for those civilian deputies to deal with it, these full-time nobles will sign again. After receiving Heidel's report, Marin was also very angry. He did not get the earldom of Oldenburg with the support of these waste nobles, but with the army. Therefore, Marin does not intend to tolerate these incompetent nobles, but intends to send those incompetent nobles to Las Vegas, so that they can live a life of drunkenness and dream. But who should be found to replace these nobles? If the small nobles are found to replace the big nobles, it is better to say. Because, after all, they are also nobles. However, if those civilian deputies who originally worked for the great nobles are promoted, it seems a bit against the rules. Moreover, even if all these people are promoted, there is still a shortage of manpower. Because most of the nobles failed the assessment and had to be cleared out. So, Hayder wrote a letter, asking Marin to go to his alma mater, the University of Cologne, to recruit some more college students. Marin agreed to Hayder's suggestion on the spot, and ordered Hayder to personally go to the University of Cologne in the name of the Prime Minister of the Palace of the Earl of Oldenburg to hold a job fair and recruit some college students back. Of course, Marin also realized that if he only recruited people from the University of Cologne department would be formed. If Hayder becomes a powerful official in the future, college students from the University of Cologne can easily become his party members. Therefore, Marin made a decision not only to send Hayder to the University of Cologne to recruit people, but also to send other people to other universities to recruit people. Now, through the previous bribery, Marin has eased the relationship with the other 5 electors except the elector of Brandenburg and the elector of Saxony. Even the king of Bohemia, who was hostile to him before, poached Vladislav II, but no longer hated Marin because of the mediation of his brother, Grand Duke Alexander. So, for now, Marin can go to the University of Heidelberg in the Palatinate, Charles University in Prague in the Kingdom of Bohemia, the University of Vienna in Austria, the University of Rostock in Mecklenburg, the University of Freiburg, the University of Munich and other universities to recruit talents. As for the University of Leipzig in the Duchy of Saxony, it is better not to go there. If the recruiters dare to go there, they will be easily hacked to death by the Saxons. The University of Rostock in Mecklenburg also has some problems, because the Duchy of Mecklenburg is a younger brother of the electorate of Brandenburg, and it is inevitable that it will be affected by the electorate of Brandenburg and will be unfriendly to the people sent to recruit. However, it was the electorate of Brandenburg, not the Duchy of Mecklenburg, that had a grudge against Marin. Therefore, sending people to the University of Rostock to recruit people would at most be obstructed, and the safety of the personnel should be no problem. After all, the Duchy of Mecklenburg was not like the Saxons, who had suffered a great loss from Marin. For other universities, Marin sent people there to focus on recruiting those civilian college students. In this way, it would not be easy to stimulate the sensitive nerves of the princes where those universities were located. Because the monarchs of this era did not pay much attention to those civilian college students. In this era, the concept of family background in Europe was much stronger than that in China. In general countries, it is not too difficult for civilians to become officials. Even in the 19th century, the highest civilian official position in the European army was promoted to sergeant major. Higher, it was monopolized by the aristocracy. It was not until several large-scale revolutions in Europe in the 19th century that this shackle was broken. At present, in European countries, those talented civilians, even college students, can only become the assistants or staff of the nobles at most, and become the shadows of the nobles, but cannot become real officials who can stand on their own. Only a traverser like Marin, who was a civilian in his previous life, will not discriminate against civilians and dare to reuse civilians. Like Hayter, he was able to recruit a group of junior students when he went to Cologne University last time because he was a civilian, but he could become the Chief Justice of the East Frisian state, which stimulated a group of civilian college students. But in this way, Marin can't even think about recruiting those noble college students in the university. Because those arrogant noble college students may be very dissatisfied with Marin's behavior. Of course, those aristocratic college students who are down and out are an exception. However, Marin doesn't care whether he can recruit noble college students. Because most of the noble college students are just messing around. You know, there is no college entrance examination these days, and noble college students are basically recommended. Only civilian college students have to pass the assessment. Therefore, in terms of quality, those civilian college students are better than those aristocratic college students. Therefore, Marin didn't care at all about the possible disgust of noble college students. In this way, Marin organized several teams to recruit talents from the above 6 universities. The team leaders were all one of the 13 Taibao recruited from the University of Cologne for the first time. Having these people as interviewers can not only stimulate those civilian college students, they themselves are role models for those civilian college students, but also test the abilities of those college students. If they are too bad, Marin doesn't want them. In addition, those noble college students whose families have declined are also Marin's targets. Those interviewers are largely prepared for such college students. After all, college students from declining nobles may be very talented, or they may be like other noble college students, who are just messing around and need to be assessed. In order to fully attract those college students, Marin equipped the 6 interviewers with gorgeous silk robes and sent a large number of armored guards. Like the last time Hayter went to the University of Cologne, he paid enough respect to the scene. Marin's requirement for the interviewers leading the team was that no matter whether they could recruit people or not, they must show their rich side and show their full posture. In addition, the 6 interviewers all brought a box of gold coins to bribe the presidents and professors of the universities, asking them to help say good things and recommend them to the civilian college students. Sometimes, the opinions of these teachers are still very important. After all, even college students in the Middle Ages had little social experience before entering society, and it was easy to fool them. That's not all. In addition to spending money and showing their rich side, Marin also asked the 6 interviewers to tell the civilian college students that as long as they were hired, they could be immediately promoted to nobles, ordinary knights who were not hereditary. Of course, this knight was granted by Marin in the name of the so-called Duke of Egypt. There was no fiefdom, no benefits, and it was just an empty title. But even such an empty title is very attractive to those civilian college students. Moreover, as long as those commoner college students were given an empty title of nobility, they could perfectly avoid the unspoken rule of the European aristocratic circles that commoners cannot be officials. You see, we didn't let commoners be officials, they are also nobles. Although, they are nobles of the non-existent Principality of Egypt, they are also nobles. Well, strictly speaking, they are exiled nobles.